Okay. Good morning, everyone, and I apologize for the delay in getting started with this morning's live stream, Stitch and Bitch, medieval style with the creative Contessa. We had some technical issues. We're still figuring out this two-camera setup. So as you see, we've got a split screen. We've got one screen for sewing, and this is where I'll be doing my sewing, so you can actually see what I'm doing. And then we have the other screen for, well, you can see me. So we'll see how this works.
Yeah, with the camera to here, so that when you look at that, it doesn't look like you're.
Maybe, I don't know. Okay, as always, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. I'm going to be working on some of my small clothes, my weight wears today. In fact, we're going to be doing an overhaul of my camicia. This is a 15th century Italian undergarment. This is the layer that would go against your skin, and then your dresses, plural, go on top of this. And this is the layer that gets the hell laundered out of it. So it's white linen, and you can boil it, and you can bleach it, and you can put it in the sun, and nothing will happen to it. It will just get whiter, which is what you want. So I've had this one for 3 years, 4 years at this point, 5 years. Yeah. So it's been around for a while, and what has happened is, got to figure out, sorry, still figuring out where exactly. Yeah, so what's happened is that the binding around the neckline, this is the layer that really damaged, and damage it has certainly taken. So we're going to be removing this band and redoing it. Now I could, if I wanted to be really lazy, just recover the whole thing. I could just take a strip of linen and just recover the frayed linen, the frayed, dirty, very oily linen, because even though I have, of course, laundered this frequently using a variety of medieval and modern techniques to remove oils and stains, eventually skin oils and the dirt that combine with it from the air, the detritus from the air, pollution, in fact, sometimes modern pollutants, that eventually does combine and it just doesn't come out anymore. So we are going to make it come out by taking it off entirely. And I'm using this as an opportunity to actually completely rework this neckline because it's actually too low in the back. This is the back. This is the front, and you can see the contrast. The front is lower than the back, but the back is actually not high enough to protect the backs of my dresses against my skin. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to actually bring up the back by actually shortening the, putting in more pleats here in the sleeves. So this will get actually shorter like this, and then that will bring the back up like that. And then that will actually be high enough to protect my dresses from my corrosive skin. Yeah. So if you have any questions at any time, please feel free to ask them. I'm just trying to figure out, I need to probably bring this a little bit closer. Sorry, still figuring out the second camera, everyone. This is a bit of an experiment with this particular phone. Okay. I think that will actually show you what I'm working on. Comment, that explains the state of my husband's linen pillowcases. Yeah, so the reality is that your hair, your skin, they all produce oils, perfectly natural, and they're good for your skin, but in combination with the detritus in the air pollution, soot, smoke, dust, that kind of combines to make this really pungent, powerful mixture that will ultimately really stain linen. And, you know, you can keep laundering it, and there are increasingly corrosive methods of getting out that buildup, but eventually you'll just wear the linen away. And that's actually happened in the case of this binding around the neckline. And in any case, over the years, you know, stitches have come out, and I've, you know, done really hasty. Oh, actually, that was a lady in waiting who did these stitches. She was not a professional sewist as I am, so I was grateful for any help just to make it hold together. But this is a good opportunity to also redo it. But before I get started with that, I wanted to actually share with you a repair I did, of which I'm really super proud, on my last journey on another linen undergarment, one of my Franco-Burgundian smocks. And you see it's a different style. It doesn't have a pleated neckline, and that's because up in the north they had a
different style of undergarment than they had in the 15th century in the south. Although that
south,
eventually
although
the
the
southern
southern
style
of
of
cameecha caught on and became popular and made its way north by the end of the 15th century.
Anyway,
Anyway, this
originally
for the neckline, I only did a really tiny little turned edge hem, so that it was simple, it was quick, it got it done, and it was neat and tidy, and it looked good. But
this
this linen is very fine,
and
and so it's not the strongest linen. And when I undressed at some point in the last several months, I actually tore the back of the dress. You can see where the split was. I actually tore it open straight down the grain. And so that kind of tear is unfortunately not a seam tear, and that requires a special sort of creative repair.
And so
what I ended up doing, and I did this about a month ago, and I wish I wanted to live stream the process, and I wanted to film the process, and I don't think the live stream definitely didn't happen, and I don't think I even filmed the process. So I'm going to just show you quickly what I did. I actually cut out a strip of linen, straight grain, not bias cut. And I cut it out so that there was enough of a patch to actually go down, or enough of an extension on the strip to go down to cover the split. And then I actually ended up using buttonhole stitches down the split to knit the split back together over both the binding and the shell, the fabric
of the garment itself, creating an extra strong spot there. And it also looks nice.
And it's nice. You can't really necessarily see it very well in the camera, but it actually looks really nice. It looks decorative now because it's a really nice tight buttonhole stitch going all the way down. And then I ended up reinforcing the rest of the neckline with that strip so that there will be no more rips that will happen here in the back. So as I pull on it, I can really feel it's a lot stronger than it was. And I think I'm going to go ahead and put a facing like that on the front as well, just to add some strength and reinforce the front. Even though that's less likely to happen in the front, I can kind of feel some spots where it might. So yeah, that's how I ended up repairing this rip. I put a facing on it, and then I buttonhole stitched those edges together like a surgeon stitching skin together, but with prettier stitches than surgeons use. Oh, is the audio doubled? Oh, that's good to know. Okay, thank you for letting me know. Unfortunately. Okay. Sorry, I'm just now seeing that. Let me see if I can fix that. Unfortunately, there's no way to turn off the second camera microphone because YouTube doesn't allow that. Why would they? Let me see if there's a way I can.
Okay. Did that fix the sound? Unfortunately, trying to.
Okay. Did that fix the sound? issues, I will just delete this first. I will edit this first part out and redo it. Okay, I think I fixed the sound issues I think I finally found the mute microphone button on the second camera. So hopefully that will have taken care of that. Okay, is there only one set of voices now? Well, hopefully some viewers will come back. Okay. So I apologize. I wish I had seen that comment before now. Anyway, so good morning. Susan was say pretty much incomprehensible? If so, then I'll just repeat what I said now in a more clear way. Let's see. Right. So I will. You were able to tell what I was saying? Okay. Then I'll just move on. Okay. So also needs to stop. I was really rather proud of this repair, as I was saying, but I'm definitely going to be adding a facing here. Not today, though. That will be a different project. Today, because this is wearable, I would like to actually put this to the side for now. I just wanted to show you that repair. But this is kind of reaching the point of being embarrassing, especially if anyone is actually talking to me up close, then they can actually see how worn that neckline is. So the first thing I'm going to be doing today is actually, and we'll see how far we get, is I'm going to remove this very tattered strip. And that is basically, for the most part, going to mean that the pleats come out. That's okay, because as I was saying, I want to rework it anyway. The whole point is in part, to be able to redo it. Now, as I'm thinking about it, I don't necessarily want to redo the front pleating. Put to hold this, it's tiny cartridge pleating is what it is for those wearing. So the neckline on this one is in very tiny cartridge pleats. And I might actually run some stitches through it to hold those pleats in place before I remove the front of the band. But I can go ahead and remove the back, because the back is going to have to be redone as well, I think. Or maybe not. Maybe I just have to redo the sleeves. I've actually never done an adjustment like this before, so we're going to see what happens. I'm actually going to start by, then you're actually going to get to see some stitching. I'm going to take some thread and I'm going to run it through these pleats to secure the pleats as they are. And interestingly, the stitches that I originally put in to secure these pleats back when I did the cartridge pleating in the midst of time, they're all gone. They have worn away, which is not surprising. So if at any point you have questions, just let me know in the comments. I am really sorry about that sound issue. I wish I'd noticed it before. So we just got back I just returned to Korea from a sort of round the world trip, where I went around the US to teach dance at a bunch of places. And then I went to the UK, where I was supposed to be performing on Britain's Got Talent, but then that got pushed back to January. So we toured for a couple of days, then hopped on Queen Mary 2 and cruised back to Oklahoma. But the Southampton Oxfam, I actually found some really, really amazing books for very little money. And I was not planning to make a large quantity book purchases there. I'll actually have my condottiero go and fetch those books out, and we will look through those when my fingers need a break from sewing. But we found, for instance, 2 Museum of London books on medieval craftsmen, and we found books on, we found a book of late 15th century wills in the original Latin or the original late Middle English, early modern English with translations. I mean, we found some very esoteric things for very little money, some of which are out of print. So, yeah.
Mallory in the original.
We found a collection of Mallory's complete works in the original Middle English. It was an unexpected shopping trip before embarking on a transatlantic crossing on Queen Mary 2.
Added it.
Thankfully, we had plenty of allowance on the back end, so it didn't impact us there, because goodness knows we added like 25 to 30 pounds to our package.
Truly did.
So I'm just running a stitch line of stitching all the way down through these pleats, just to secure them in place so that when I remove the neckband, I don't have to redo the pleating, even though the pleats are pretty folded in. Solid band of pleats. So what's everyone else working on these days? I plan to actually turn my attention to some clothing for my condottiero now that my pink gamora is finished. Next week, stay tuned, and hopefully the technology will be more finely honed by then. Stay tuned. We're going to be doing a post-mortem on the pink gamora. So I'm going to go through, now that it's had a couple of wearings, I'm going to go through things I'm going to need to fix, things I'll do differently next time, things I'll pay attention to next time better, and also the things that are actually working, because there's quite a few things that are working really nicely in the new Gamora with the new pattern that I made, because the way I made this latest pink wool Gamora is not the same as any of my others. So there was a bit of experimentation there. So unfortunately, there is a lag in the comments. So if you've made a comment or asked a question and I haven't answered it yet, it's because it hasn't shown up yet. It looks like I might be going back to England maybe in January for Britain's Got Talent to actually perform medieval dance for the judges. We'll look for, yeah, we'll be in Blackpool though, if that actually ends up working out. You can find in stores. It's really amazing. My condottiero is heading off to the gym. We're now now, as I said, I'm in Korea, and the evening temperatures have finally turned cool enough that we're finally getting some fall foliage. But temperatures in the daytime are still in the 60s here, or in the mid-teens for those of you who track centigrade. And yeah, it's been unusually warm to unusually late a period. So there we go. And then I'm going to go and run a parallel set of stitches just below that. Because if you have, when you're doing cartridge pleating, for those who've never done cartridge pleating and you're pondering it, there's a much more regular technique to do it than the one I'm doing right now. But generally you always run parallel lines of stitches or triple lines of stitches to secure and stabilize the pleats in a very even fashion. So I'm just putting in a second line of stitching that's lower and parallel, more or less parallel to the last one. I would actually like to, well, I need to, there's not a question of like to, I really need to make another kamicha, because I only have 2 functioning kamichas at this point. And blank work is where you actually pull thread or drawn thread so called. It's where you actually pull threads out in a specific pattern and then go over the gaps with white thread to create interesting geometric patterns. And I've experimented with that. I actually started working on a band of it to attach. Originally, it was intended to be attached to this one. And I had a lot of lessons learned there. And I may or may not ever get around to using that band that I almost finished actually to actually attach to the neckline of a camicia. But I still definitely want to have a nice white work neckline, because if you look in the 1480s and 1490s portraits of Florentine women, if you look at their, and even some 1470s really, if you look at the Crivelli's famous for this, if you look at the neckline of their camicie, you can actually see this beautiful patterning, and if you look really closely, you realize it's drawn thread. It's not lace, it's drawn thread, which does create a lacy look, but without the hassle of lace, of bobbin lace specifically. Let me see. Susan is reading both the Charles the Bold bio and the court and civil societies in the Low Countries during the Burgundian Dominion, and also doing repairs to Oblasts. Yeah, the Charles the Bold bio. How are you finding that, Susan? I really like Richard Vaughn's style, and he is definitely working from a lot of primary source material, or working from the Victorians' transcriptions. In a bio. For those who don't know, is a biographer of the Valois Dukes of Burgundy, and he has a complete series on the Valois Dukes of Burgundy, from Philip the Bold all the way through to his great-grandson, Charles the Bold, the last Valois Duke of Burgundy. Okay, well, I have now secured these pleats here in the back, and then I think I'm just going to go ahead and do the same for the front, because I really don't think I need to change the way this is pleated. I think I'm only going to have to change the way the sleeves are. I'm just going to redo the pleating on the sleeves to bring this up so that the back comes up. The front doesn't need to come up. Yeah. See how that works. Complete experiment. Unfortunately, we do not have any extant camicie. Thinking about this before I make this statement, from Italy from this period. We have some fragments that were found in Lengberg, Schloss Lengberg, a castle in Austria. But those are not complete, so it's kind of hard to tell if they're man or woman or what. And they're a slightly different style, so it's not necessarily helpful for, how they would have done the pleating for this exact kind of neckline. It's good for pleating. Now, the Lengberg finds are brilliant for just generally how 15th century pleating can work in general, because there's like but it's how they would have done the pleats for the neckline versus the sleeve for this specific neckline, as it were. Ooh, Merovingian garb. Oh, that is splendid. There's some great grave finds for Merovingian, Merovingian jewelry and metal accessories for certain, and there are some bog finds from that era. So yeah, that's pretty exciting. The Merovingians, of course, for those who don't know, are, that's like 6th to 7th century, kind of leaking into the 8th century. And that's, they were a migratory people originally. And so the earlier garments for the women, it's hypothesized were, like actually pants and shorter tunics that only came to maybe like mid-calf, so that they would have real mobility to be able to ride and be able to do their work. Oh, good morning. We have a 16th century Burgundian joining in this morning instead of a 15th century. Well, welcome to the better era. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do what I said I'm going to do and secure these pleats in the front. Yeah, Ocean answer, if you have any questions, in addition to answers, then just pop them in the comments and I'll get to them. Colors, I guess, go with, I'm assuming. What about length and cut in all of it? What about the accessories? You've already sort of purchased those and you're planning your ensemble around that. Some people like to get the metal bits first and then plan the soft bits around the metal bits that they have. I go the other way. I make the soft bits and then I look for the metal accessories. Yeah, for those just joining, I am repairing a chemise, 15th century Florentine, so like 1470s to 1490s Florentine. And what I'm doing right now, because for those who are just joining, I'll repeat, the neckline is worn away, as hopefully you can see here. And I need to replace the neckline band. And I'm also going to be bringing up the back so that it actually protects my gown against my disgusting human skin and the disgusting air. So I'm going to be redoing some of the pleats we've decided in the sleeves. So right now what I'm doing is taking thread and putting in parallel lines of stitches to hold the pleats in place as they are, so that when I remove the band, it'll just be a question of replacing the band and not redoing or fussing with the pleats. Right, so that's the process right now. I've actually never done this before. I've never replaced a band before. So that's that will be interesting. This is a experimental archaeology 101. Before he was marble paintings like Eskimore, Lawrence Alma Tadema did Merovingian paintings. Oh. I have to say, I actually have no idea who Lawrence Alma Tadema is. That is a new name for me. I love it when I learn things from my chat. Ocean's answer, are you working on anything in particular? You know, undergarments, a lot of people focus really hard on making beautiful overgarments, sumptuous, you know, they get wrapped up in the overgarments, but the unsung heroes of the historic fashion world are really and truly the undergarments, the linen small clothes, and I did not anchor that stitch. Tisk, tisk, tisk. You know, the linen clothes are the ones that wear away, that develop holes, or in the case of stockings, whether it's wool, silk, or linen, because of course all of those were actually choices in the 15th century for your stockings. So, you know, they're the ones that get worn away, and a lot of modern people these days are likely to just throw them away rather than repair them, because, you know, it is even for linen or wool stockings, medieval stockings that you might buy from a stocking shop, it's, you know, often less expensive just to pay $35 than the amount of time you would spend repairing them. But I always repair mine until there's literally no. There's going to be a lot of repairs happening over the next couple of months. Penzic was, of course, pretty deleterious to all of my stockings, all of the walking and dancing I do. And then I've had this recent spate this last month of back-to-back events where I was leading and teaching dancing, which, as you can imagine, is deleterious to one's footwear. I think I can actually lower this. I'm going to lower this camera. Let's see if that makes the stitching even more useful. I'm sorry, I had planned to do some live streams in the US a month ago, but then I ended up stranded in Asheville during Hurricane Helene with no power and no internet to speak of. So that kind of put a crimp on all the live stream plans that I originally had for that period. And then with the like going in all the various directions. I was really never quite certain when I would actually be awake enough to do a live stream. Let's see. Ocean's Answer is working on a copy of A Little Boy's Black Doublet with a crud ton of silk velvet trim from, oh yes, silk velvet. Oh my God. Silk velvet. So is your silk velvet 100%, meaning the backing is silk too, or just the pile? I have developed a special loathing for 100% silk velvet. If the pile is silk, it's just so slinky. It feels great. I could roll in it all day. Seriously, I would. Oh, absolutely delicious again, but it moves with a capricious mind of its own. You know, just trying to sew a straight stitch is almost impossible. You think you've sewn a straight line, and then you unfold the thing you've done, and it's got all these weird warps in it because of how mobile silk velvet is. I do have a bunch of silk velvets where the backing is something much more solid, like linen or polyester, and those are just fine to work with, no problems whatsoever. But my 100% silk velvet, I curse it every time I sew with it. I curse it, and here I am planning to do a new hood for my, not a hennin, what they would have called a mitre or a horn, or in 15th century English, or a bonnet maybe. I'm planning to make a new silk velvet hood for that, and I'm dreading that process so very much. Ocean's Answer, it's 100% silk velvet. I despise it. Yeah, I did baste stitches. I really, and you know how many times I had to undo it and redo it. And then eventually I just decided that good enough, perfect was the enemy of good enough. And that at the end of the day, because it's velvet, you can't necessarily see, thankfully, if every stitch isn't exactly straight, because the pile absorbs a lot of those sins. So yeah, silk velvet, man. What do you have any? Do you use how do you caress your velvet in such a way that it just behaves when you go to put the needle in it? I have tried everything. I've tried, you know, brushing it with the grain very carefully to make sure it's perfectly flat. I've tried hanging it and trying to, you know, like actually like clipping it up and hanging it and doing that. And that didn't get me a perfectly straight line. Ugh. And I just made a silk stomacher to go over my kirtles and under my gowns for my Burgundian fashions. And it's a rectangle. It's a rectangle. How hard should a rectangle be to sew? Oh, no, no, no. It was vile. It is the most vile rectangle I've ever sewn in my life. And I've never, ever talked to a sewist, term I'm going to discuss here in a moment, who had any love for working with silk velvet. So it's nice to know that I'm in good company. It's beautiful, but it extracts a heavy emotional toll. Grave shirter, Gretchen chiming in on the Merovingian comment. There are grave finds of garment fragments from tombs. I purchased my wool first, and I'm planning my tablet woven trim, then the expensive metal bits. Right. Oh, Marguerite, that Gretchen, right. Gretchen, I forgot that your real name is Gretchen Schroeder because you're from Pennsylvania, Dutch country. Right, Marguerite, it's lovely to see you. Thank you for joining me. Yeah, I noticed there's a big toward Lombard and Merovingian and that sort of migratory clothing. I lived in Heidelberg. Well, I studied at the University of Heidelberg, and then I lived in that region for 12 years. And so there's a lot of grave finds from the migratory peoples era that are in local museums. So I'm very well acquainted with them because, of course, I spent lots of my time in museums when I lived in Germany. Actually, wherever I live, I spend lots of times in museums. Response to the silk velvet question. Honestly, I just base stitched by hand, then stitched by machine. Honestly, good enough is good enough. As my grandma used to say, if they're looking that close at my seams, it's too close. Yeah, I I've somehow resorted to threatening violence in my videos when if anyone cares to look too closely at my seams and get that close to my person, specifically my neckline. Yeah, I only hand sew my things these days, mostly because I only have a foot treadle machine and the band broke, so we need to get a new leather band to drive the power from the treadle to the actual wheel. But also, I've just been hand sewing my medieval stuff just because it allows me to take my projects with me wherever I go. And I enjoy the process. It means that my output rate is pretty damn slow, I will say. Especially in combination with the kind of moving schedule we've had with the US Army over the last 10 years, where we're moving every 1 to 2 years. And that's not an exaggeration. So every time you move, it just takes such effort. I was so thorough on these stitches. Oh my goodness. Oh, why was I so thorough on stitching this neckline into place? My God, this is excessive. Goodness, just the removal of these stitches. This surgery is unbearable. Ugh, why are my stitches so good? Someone was actually, I think it was Susan actually, was asking about if you're attaching skirts to the bodice, for instance, using triple ply thread instead of double ply, doubled up thread instead of tripled up thread, because the ply is what's actually plied into the thread itself. That's a different question. I would never recommend tripling your thread unless the skirt is actually really, really heavy. Because the thing about seams is you want your seams to be strong so that they don't just fall apart at the barest provocation. But you don't want your seams to be so strong that if actual force is exerted on the garment, that the fabric tears instead of the seam. You always want your seams to give before the fabric. How do I know this, dear viewer? Well, if you haven't seen my video on my medieval sewing mistakes, I recommend you watch that. It's a good time, but also it talks about this and visualizes this tale I'm about to tell. I was leading dance at a castle in Germany in 2010, and I had just finished making this really cute pink wool kirtle, which fast and skippy steps for people who don't know what pleats are. And another couple danced close to me, and the gentleman stepped on my train just as I was dancing away with these fast and forceful steps. And he didn't realize that he was stepping on my train, and so the full weight of his very muscular body came to bear on my train, and the full force of me moving forward came to bear on the seams around my waist. And so the waist of my kirtle, which doesn't have a waist seam, by the way, shredded. Just shredded, and also in the back. I mean, shredded apart. The lining, the interlining, and the shell shredded apart because the seams were too strong to break. So, yeah, I did end up, I show in the medieval mistakes video how I ended up fixing that. I was able to darn it back together I rewove it back together using needle and thread around the waist. And you can barely see it because the overlayer was wool and it does absorb quite a few of those stitches, so it's only barely visible. But it was a lot of work to knit that thing back together with needle and thread. So I always say, make sure your seams are not overly strong. There's a balance. Where on earth? Did I somehow not? No, there they are. It looks like my stitching did not go through in all the places I would like it to. So I'm actually going to go back because these pleats are three-dimensional enough that you can see that these pleats dimensional enough that it actually needs lines of stitching securing it in front and back. So I'm going to go ahead and do that before I completely pull this band away. So the term sewist. In my most recent short that I spun off of the last project vlog in my 5th century Florentine Gomorrah vlog, the latest short, if you care to go take a look if you haven't, I basically say, "Dear sewists." So 2 people have objected to the use of the term sewist instead of seamstress, but those terms are actually not interchangeable, and I use the term sewist with intention. So a seamstress, and a lot of people think that seamstress is the feminine of tailor. It is not, historically, nor is it professionally. Really, a tailor is someone who has mastered the art of tailoring, which is the construction of garments, right? That is a tailor. A seamstress is historically someone who literally seamed the garment together, because in the Middle Ages there was a complete division of labor. The tailors were the ones who patterned and fit and cut the garments. It was the seamsters, the seam masters, or the seam mistresses who actually put the stitches in, who actually sewed the pieces together. Those were 2 separate professions, and tailor is not is. And so sewist is a gender-neutral term for a person who sews. And generally, the implication is they're more of a hobbyist, less of a professional. But it is a real term. I didn't make it up, and it is the appropriate term for the group of people I was addressing. Oh, those pleats are gorgeous. Thank you. They looked better before they got filthy with my with the grossness of my skin, but yeah, and they're pretty solid. Definitely want to make sure I get these secured before all forms of exterior stability are gone. Oh, I did it again. I didn't put an anchor stitch in. Always remember to put your anchor stitch in, dear viewers and fellow sewists. So what do you all think? What's your opinion of the term sewist? Does it trigger you and make you scream seamstress, or do you not care? Have you ever heard the term before? I'm interested to hear what my fellow community feels about it. And I never thought that it would be such a hot button topic to trigger not 1 but 2 comments under the video. Oh my God, the world in which we live. Such a crazy time. Yeah, I guess these pleats don't look half bad, do they? I never really looked at them that closely before. Oh, they're pretty nice. So these pleats, try to apply for making your box pleats, and cartridge pleats. And then there's another technique whereby you do a sample of the box pleating using a sample of the fabric out of which you're going to do the final, not box pleats, sorry, cartridge pleats. And then you can see how many box pleats or how many cartridge pleats, gosh darn it, how many pleats you're going to need per square inch, sort of thing. So those are the 2 different techniques, approved techniques for cartridge pleating. Cartridge pleating. And then it will also tell you how much fabric you're going to need for the amount of area that you need to cover with your cartridge pleats. That's what the purpose of doing this sample is to tell you, well, you're going to need, if you have a 18-inch neckline, then based on the density and thickness of this fabric, you're going to need 64 inches of cartridge pleats of X depth in order to get all the way around that neckline, for instance. I did not use any of those techniques when I cut and made this. I didn't know that at the time. I'm mostly an autodidact, so That means that I know what I know because I've taught myself, not because I've ever attended any classes or schools or anything like that. Increasingly, thanks to the internet, there's a lot more information available than there was when I started this journey 30 years ago. 30 years ago, there was nothing available on the internet, by the way. Yeah. A lot of the things I do because I figured it out through trial and error, or because I just had a brainwave that happened to work. So with these cartridge pleats, it was the same way, basically. I knew what a cartridge pleat should look like. I had a vague idea of how to make them, and it never really occurred to me that I could experiment with the linen to see how much I would need to actually get all the way around the neckline and the sleeves. And that's why at the sleeves, the cartridge pleats are not very cartridgey. They're more, more like knife pleats. Whereas there was plenty of fabric in the front of the gown, so plenty of cartridge pleats there for the front and back panels. Let's see, comments on the pleats. I'm wondering if the professional costumer's trick of laying tissue paper between the layers of slippery fabric would work with hand sewing. Now that is an interesting idea. To stabilize the silk velvet using tissue paper. So I will say I've tried stabilizing the silk velvet by backing it with a fabric that is more stable, but that linen that maybe had too much give, now that I think about it. So maybe backing it with even stiffer, more stable fabric would work in any case, but tissue paper, now that's an interesting idea. I will give that a try. Next comment. Ocean says, I tried the tissue. I said fudge it. Well, I won't waste my time there. No point. No point in wasting time on something that someone else has already tried and tossed away. I am a student of history. Unlike many Americans, I learn from history, and I will not repeat others' mistakes unless I want to literally see for myself what went wrong. Comment on sewist. Sewist is better than sewer. Sewer. Yeah, for certain. Even though, ironically, the term sewer actually makes its first appearance in the 14th century. But I think back then probably they were not calling the drains for foul water from the streets sewers. Etymology is such a fascinating topic. Yeah, it's fascinating how certain terms that seem, for all intents and purposes, to be neutral will trigger people into responding, into reminding you that not everything you think is neutral is. Yeah. Just putting this through. For cartridge pleating, when you actually go to do it, once you've figured out how frequent your pleats should be to create the depth of pleat you need, etc., and like I said, most people I know, there is a mathematical formula. There's also the trial method. Once you have actually ascertained that, then of course you mark your dots. Your pleats need to be to create your depth pleat, and then you run pairs of stitching, and then you just draw them shut. That creates pleats like this. And those stitches, you can just leave those in to actually secure the cartridge pleats. I'm kind of surprised at how the stitches that used to be there securing these cartridge pleats seem to have disintegrated, which I guess is an object lesson in what happens to grave clothes in the grave when the body starts breaking down. It's always surprising when anything survives in a grave for that reason. Sewist is better than sewer. Yeah, way better than sewer. Sewer. So my spring calendar looks like it's filling up with some gigs where I'm going to be teaching medieval and Renaissance dance. Mostly in the US. I'm hoping to maybe get some gigs in Europe. If you're in Europe and you would like to hire me to come and teach workshops, medieval and Renaissance dance at your events, to generally bring my sound should be back. As you all know, machinery constantly wants to run out of power. It is the world in which we live. And also, after doing my live stream tour of Gyeongju last Monday, I don't think we actually recharged the microphone. So, mea maxima culpa. Some of you may empathize with me on this. I had a couple of down days, let me just say. Yeah. So anyway, on to other topics, because I really don't want to go down that road. Not now. Let's see, what other projects am I planning? I am actually planning to get around to making some Shilla era clothing. The Shilla dynasty in Korea was the first millennium dynasty that basically ended up dominating the entire Korean peninsula. And it was really an era of golden flourishing for Korea. The Shilla dynasty was, patron of the arts, patron of literature, very progressive. Women and men were basically equal. There were queens regnant. It was a real time of flourishing, architectural accomplishments and achievements. And their clothing was very beautiful. So I've been wanting to make some Shilla era clothing for a while. So that is on the docket as well. As I said, though, I hand sew everything, so my rate of output is not the highest. I have actually considered compromising if I can just get my sewing machine up and running again. I have considered compromising on the long seams, the long interior seams, just so that I can get some more clothing made. A lot of my garments are starting to literally fall apart, not at the seams, but at the fabric. And at that point, there's not much you can do. I'm actually also thinking about taking, for those of you which I wear my miter, right? There's a bunch of video of me out there on my channel, and that, also a getting dressed video, the Burgundian getting dressed video, that dress. It's got some pretty bad staining on the outside, and it's really faded over time. It's 14 years old. So I'm actually thinking of turning it. And for those of you who don't know what I mean by that, I'm literally going to take it apart at the seams, turn it, and then sew it again so that the fresh pink unstained inside is now on the outside. So that is probably coming down the pipeline as well. My machine is down too. Perhaps they conspired. So my machine is an antique German foot treadle machine that we actually got at the junkyard, and we're paid €7 to take off of the junkyard's hands, rather than costing them the cost of disposal. And it was actually in perfect working order. Perfect. It was oiled. I think this has been 20 years ago. I think Oma had just died, grandma had just died, and grandchildren are like, we don't sew. What is this piece of junk? And they tossed it. And I think she had just been sewing with it like 2 weeks before because it was fresh and oiled and in perfect working order. And I've sewn 2 pavilions on this thing. I've sewn through my finger on this thing. It's just the leather band finally gave up the ghost that drives from the treadle to the actual wheel. So I just have to replace it. It's not a big deal. I just have to do it. Yeah, it's a great find. It's actually sitting next to me. This is the cabinet. Oops, that's its cabinet. See, it still has its key. And there it is. There's the treadle. There's the wheel that needs the band, and there's the machine itself. And yeah, that thing is amazing. It is. Yeah. And of course, it has no plastic parts, so that's also super beneficial. Comment: my neighbor across the road moved out and gave me his grandma's. I need to have it repaired though. Was it electric, or was it a foot treadle machine, or both? Because sometimes a lot of them, were foot treadle machines, and then they were given engines to so that you didn't have to use the foot function anymore. My mom actually had one that was originally a foot treadle machine, and probably in the 50s, I think, got retrofitted with an engine. My grandmom did too. I had 3 grandmoms growing up. 4, actually, I guess, yeah. So I have a complicated family. Yeah, I have a complicated family. Anyway, at least 2 of my grandmothers had machines that were originally foot treadle machines, but then had engines fitting to them. Unfortunately, when both of them died, I had not yet gotten into my sewist phase, and I also had no idea of the value of those kind of machines. So unfortunately, I think they got thrown out, donated to Goodwill or whatever. And now that makes me extra sad thinking about that, because they were, of course, singers, all metal parts, beautiful. You've lost, sound is okay? Okay, good. Oh, so foot treadle. Yeah. So Dea, what's broken on your foot treadle machine? Is it something internal, or is it just like the connector from the treadle to the machine needs to be repaired? Yeah, I love foot treadle machines also because it means I'm getting a little bit of exercise while sewing. Sitting still, I don't like generally sitting still. I can actually hand sew some things on my elliptical cross trainer, if that tells you anything about my neurosis. Confessions with the Contessa. The part that holds the machine up. The part that holds the machine up on the table. We actually my ex-husband ended up cutting out a piece, because my cabinet was also missing the piece that would allow you to actually would allow the machine to sit up on the table. So we had to do that repair as well. Thankfully, my ex-husband was very handy and had no problem doing that. Yeah. He's a very good guy. We did not split for rancorous reasons. We are still very good friends to this day. Some of you may know him, Gerhard von Wustenberg, twice King of Drachenwald, for those of you who were in the SCA, now lives in Sweden. Very good person. Yeah, I am cursing. How frayed it is. The band that goes over top of these pleats is definitely just completely given up the ghost. And I already cut a band to replace this band, but I'm actually thinking I think I'm going to go to some of my heavier linen. The band I cut was from fine linen. I think that's a mistake, considering it. I'm going to go to my heavier linen. I actually bought some really heavy linen for arming garments. So I think I'm going to go and find that linen and cut a band out from that. So that decreases the likelihood I'm going to have to do this again before the rest of the garment fails. Wow. Wow. Geez, these stitches are ridiculous. What was I thinking? Goodness. Okay, there we go. So let's see, other projects. Oh, or other things about books. One of the books, which is not here in this pile, was actually from, we also went to the Leeds Royal Armories, or the Royal Armories in Leeds while we were in England. And that was very interesting because they don't have just European arms and armor there. They have a sizable collection from the Middle East, from the Far East, from Indonesia, from South Asia, from Eastern Asia, and medieval pieces too. But they also have that also had actually not as many good books as I would have, but they did have one very interesting book, and it was very esoterically interesting. 14th century inventories from and expense accounts from the Royal Armory at the Tower of London in the 14th century. And so it just has all of these really, it has expense accounts showing what was purchased, what was received, inventories of what was in stock, and it's not just plate armor. It's the mail bits, it's the soft garments, it's the weapons, it's archery supplies, it's everything you would need to prosecute a war, basically. And what was really fascinating to me, what I didn't know, is sort of chain mail. Mail is somewhere between armor and clothing, in my opinion. It's clothing. It's soft. It's protective, but it's soft, and it's meant to be, and it can be tailored like clothing can. I mean, so can plate armor, but that's a different conversation. Anyway, they actually have in the expense accounts, and they actually have surviving examples of half riveted mail. And I didn't know this was a thing. I always assumed that all mail was riveted before the modern era, when we started getting cheap and perhaps even a little slothful in our mail production. But they actually have, in the expense accounts, it actually says, refers to fully riveted of what half riveted mail is. Half riveted of the discs is riveted, and the other is just butted and hammered shut, just hammered flat. Now that's the difference between butted mail, modern butted mail that I've seen in this. Modern butted mail, they don't actually hammer the links shut, like forging them shut, basically smushing them shut with a hammer. Whereas for the most part, the medieval half riveted mail, the non-riveted ones are hammered shut so that the two ends fuse, basically, but not also then riveted in. So that was interesting. And also there are soft arming garments mentioned in the Tower of London Armory in the 14th century. So it's interesting, even for those of you who might be sewing arming garments for your man or woman at arms. I can recommend this book, and I'll show it in a little bit. Have any of you worked on arming garments for, any sort of historical martial art? It's an interesting added dimension to the garment, because not only does it have to fit over the body properly, it has to fit under the armor properly. And so you've got this like double whammy layering effect on how it needs to be tailored. Needs to be tailored from the inside and the outside to fit, which I guess is, oh no, it's not true. Of your interim layers should just be made, and then the top layers should be made to already have the, and then you need to make an arming garment to fit it, even though it should probably go the other way. It doesn't always, especially once the armor will outlast the arming garment for certain. The arming garment will wear away because armor eats fabric at an alarming rate. In fact, if you look at Diego di Cavaniglia's farsetto, those who don't know, there is an extant arming / civilian garment from the 15th century, Diego di Cavaglia, condottiero and conde of Cavaglia, Count of Cavaglia. He died in 1481, and the garment in which he was buried was a garment he definitely wore in life because it has multiple sets of lacing holes in the peplum for hosen and for calze and for armor. And you can tell which ones are the ones meant for leg harness because they've got metal rings in the sewn into the eyelets, and they actually, you can see the weight of the armor has warped them slightly downward. So you can actually see the kind of wear and tear that armor will put on an arming garment in Diego di Cavaniglia's very beautiful farsetto. Dea says, I remember being absolutely fascinated by the child armor in the tower. Oh yeah, the child armor. The child armor actually went, some of it went, it's not, actually it might still be in the tower. We were at Leeds. But on that toured Be the World back in 2019, they actually had Charles V's child armor and Maximilian Child V's child armor, and I think Philip II's child armor on display. Yeah, it's always very interesting how, you know, that sort of, it shows just how early that kind of training started. And also, you know, that was, a lot of it was meant to be worn on parade during official functions when the young prince had to be there with his father, representing, as it were. And then the comment and the huge armor of the misogynist Henry VIII in the tower. Yeah, Henry VIII. I've actually, there's going to be a video coming out with a collection of shorts I made from our time at Leeds, and it includes the armor that was made for Henry for the Field of the Cloth of Gold. And yeah, he was absolutely, I mean, what they have on display now is the armor before he gained all the weight, by the way. They don't have his overweight armor currently on display, but he was still a super, I mean, he was like 6'2", which is tall even by today's standards, and was really tall in the early 16th century. And you can see that absolutely in his armor, but that armor was made, the suit that they have on, they have two suits on display from the Field of the Cloth of Gold. The one never got worn, or at least it didn't get worn at the Field of the Cloth of Gold because Francis, the French king, complained it was too well made, and he wouldn't actually be able to score any points on Henry in the deed of arms, which is true. This stuff is amazing. It has no vulnerability in all of the joint areas. So needed. It's all covered in plate. It's remarkable. It's a real feat of armor engineering. Really masterful. But yeah, if it would be perfect for war, but not so great for a passage of arms à plaisance, where you're just there to score points on each other and have fun with your bros. And let's be honest, in the 16th century, it was having fun with your bros. I know some people like to point to random bits of illuminations that show women, wearing armor and fighting, but those are nearly always Amazons that are being depicted, not real people. And there's only one record I know of women participating in a deed of arms, and it was a staged deed of arms as part of wedding festivities, where most assuredly they were not actually, going at each other with full force. It was sort of part of the display of the battle of love, an allegorical thing. Let me see. D. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I apologize, D. I'm so used to Romance languages that I pronounce every single syllable. I apologize, D. I got it. Thank you for correcting me. Uh, you were there in 2001. Oh, yeah. It's funny how the good thing about museums, good museums anyway, is that they change their displays with some regularity, what goes on display, how it's displayed. So yeah, it's funny. You never know when you go back after having been gone for a while whether the same items will be there or even the item you want to see will be. That can it can surprise or be a sad surprise, depending. It's a very good way for museums to keep people coming back, even local people who may have seen what's on display now, but might not have seen what will be on display next year. Museums generally having massive stores of items that never see the light of day, really. So, yeah. Some of these, oh, didn't check to see whether this one had developed. I often sleep in my linen undergarments at events because that's, especially when it's cold. And unfortunately, I sometimes develop worn away spots right around the area of my derriere, which I guess is not surprising. That's one of the heavier points of my body when I'm laying down. And I was just checking to see if this one had developed such a wear and tear spot. If you're just joining us, don't forget to hit that thumbs up, help support my channel, and please do pop any questions in the chat. I am responding as soon as they appear, which unfortunately there does seem to be a slight lag. Let's see. Yeah, this is definitely a much more grueling process than I thought it was going to be. Yeah, so this sewn with pretty strong silk thread. And clearly the silk won out here in the War of the Fibers. The linen has worn away. The silk has not even thought about doing that. Does kind of make me sad to be cutting out this silk. I guess if I were a real medieval person, I would probably be picking these threads out. I'm not going to do that. Yes, it's breaking my anti-waste heart to think about all this perfectly good silk thread that I'm just cutting through. I don't have that kind of time. My life is limited. I am mortal. What's your favorite Scadian name that you've heard? Oh, favorite Scadian name that I've heard. As a professional linguist, for those who don't know, I'm actually a trained translator, and that's what I used to do professionally until AI, machine learning, and dumping wages basically killed my career. And other apps, translation apps killed my career. Anyway, as a linguist, I'm very, very fond of melodic sounding words in general. So, I really generally love romance. Oh man, I got a little too frisky. Well, I don't actually, those look like wear and tear holes. Those look less like snip holes now that I think about it. Well, that's okay. I will just put some patches there. I'll maybe run a band. So I don't know if you can see there. Rising is where my shoulder. So this is where the weight, the of the shoulder part of my kamicha or my gamora bodice and other garments would go. And also, I often end up pinning my giornée to my gown, and also that ends up pinned to the kamicha. So that's kind of not surprising. So I think what I'll do is I'll just get a band of linen and tack it onto the inside and do some tacking stitches here to kind of thread glue it to the backing, and then, yeah, just pleat it. It'll be fine. Anyway, so yeah, I really love Romance language names because they flow so beautifully. especially Italian names. There's such a natural melodiousness to them. In fact, a friend of mine once commented that writing poetry in Italian was basically cheating. um, yeah. So, I think Sarafina or Serafina is a really beautiful name. Let's see. It's like, no, I didn't pick that name for myself. I picked Judith de Northumbria, but I picked Judith because she's a powerful woman in the Old Testament. And also there were multiple powerful queens in the sort of the end of the first millennium who were named Judith in Europe. And then the name fell out of fashion for whatever reason. And my original persona was sort of 12th century. And so that was an appropriate name for that persona. But then I discovered that we know nothing about dance and things to do in the Middle Ages. I then moved as far forward as I needed to find a period where dance was solidly identifiable, and that was the 15th century. So, but then I discovered that actually I love so much about the 15th century, the aesthetic, the clothing, the music, the games, the food. So it worked out. It was fine. The transition was fine. Yeah, so most beautiful names. Yeah, that's really hard. I would say in general, most of the names that really resonate with me are definitely Italian or Spanish, just because of the melodiousness. Portuguese names are less melodious because Portuguese is kind of a very guttural Romance language, and it has a very specific it has an almost staccato cadence to it, which is in sharp contrast to its cousins, its very close cousin, Spanish, and its first cousin once removed, Italian. Let me see. I know a Rubius, and I like his name. Yeah, Rubius is a really nice name. It also has that melodiousness to it. It's funny, medieval European names are so varied. And then, of course, there's the Latin versions of many of them because Latin was the lingua franca. Well, medieval Latin was the lingua franca in Europe in many courts and certainly in writing. Latinized version of their name, the ages. And then you can also find the vulgar version of their name. And I don't mean vulgar in a judgmental way. I mean in the vulgar tongue, the colloquial tongue, the local languages spoken by the normal people, not the erudite, educated people who spoke Latin. The original meaning of vulgar. Wow, talk about another word that was unnecessarily polarized. Oh, yeah, German can be very guttural. German is naturally guttural. It really is. Of course, if you get down into Bavaria and Austria, it takes on a much more lilting quality, and the sounds become much rounder and move further forward in the mouth and less in the back, sort of less in the back of the throat. So yeah, no, German is probably my most fluent language other than English, and yeah, it has its guttural moments. The R's, as spoken in High German outside of Bavaria, are very much in the back of your throat. Yeah, I enjoy speaking German, and German is definitely my language of choice when I'm frustrated or when I'm expressing frustration. Which you can always tell if I'm frustrated. I lapse into German without noticing it. Yeah. Yeah. Euphemia is also a really. I really didn't want these stitches coming out. Good on me, I guess. Yay. So is anyone working on any repairs? I actually enjoy doing repairs because it requires generally a lot of creativity, especially if I have time to actually devote to the repair instead of, oh my God, I'm at the event, the hemline just ripped or the neckline just ripped, I need to fix it now. Um, but I enjoy really challenging repairs because, like I really enjoyed, for those who didn't see it, I really enjoyed repairing the rip in the back of this smock neckline because it really made me have to think about structural integrity and also, making a nice, a pretty scar, so to say, right, in the fabric. And so I really enjoyed getting to do actually decorative stitches as part of the repair process. And actually what I did is first I did little whip stitches and then I went over that with the buttonhole stitch to make that pretty. So now, it's got a little pretty line of stitching in the back. And I guess if I really wanted to make it look not like a repair, I could actually put in another panel of fabric that looks just like that and do a line of buttonhole stitching, that is parallel on the other side of the neckline. And then you would just think I was doing it on purpose to make it pretty. Comment, no repairs, but touching up block printing on a friend's pelican outfit I'm making. Oh, nice. Hearing how people do it. What kind of ink or paint are you using? Did you carve the block yourself, or was it one of those really nifty laser cut ones? I bought 4 of those at Pennsic myself, actually. Did you make the ink or paint yourself using pigments? Inquiring minds, namely I, want to know if you don't mind sharing. Yeah, block printing is, I want to learn to do gold block printing here in Korea. It's a technique that was used heavily on their medieval garments. And because we actually have some extant garments, an increasing number of extant garments, the more they open up stupas at Buddhist temples in Korea. Anyway, we have a large number of extant medieval garments. We have an increasing number of extant medieval garments in Korea, and many of them, the ones from the aristocratic tombs, have gold block printing on them. And that is, it's referred to as a national treasure here, the art of gold block printing. And there is a person who does gold block printing in Bukchon village in Seoul. But a friend of mine went to try to get a workshop from him, even though it was advertised as being offered. And the person unfortunately said they have too many projects to actually offer any classes or workshops on how to do it. And that made me sad because I really want to learn how to do the Korean style gold leaf block printing as part of my recreation of the Sheila era clothing because she's known as because of the amount of gold that they kept throughout the entire city. It was just they decorated themselves in gold, the gold on their clothing, their gold ornaments, gilt wood decoration at palaces. It was, yeah, it must have been visually a stunning place to be. Yeah, I really did these stitches tightly. Let me see. Response. I carved the stamps out of rubber and I'm using Jacquard Lumiere paint. Nice. Her theme is Russian fairy tale, so all of the paints are pearlescent. Ooh, that'll be really pretty. Wow, pearlescent. That will shimmer in candlelight. That'll be lovely. Ooh, nice. Or firelight if you're, out and about by a fire or by torches or whatever. We need more torches at medievalist events, I feel like. To really, there's a dance documented in 1503 in the city of Ulm when the emperor came to visit, made a progress to the city. The city itself threw a party for him. They threw an afternoon ball for him, and the ball was documented in detail. And apparently, there was a dance. The emperor opened the dance with what is referred to as the customary fashion, with 4 of his peers carrying torches dancing with a partner and found that way with the torch bearers, basically escorting them around the floor. And I actually got to do a reenactment of that back in 2017, and it was super neat. It was pretty cool. So I'm all in favor of more torches. And we actually did reproduction, what we can, it's sort of experimental reproduction of torches. We got branches and we soaked strips of linen in wax and wrapped beeswax and wrapped those, or it might have been pitch. I mean, it probably should have been pitch, but we had beeswax. It smelled really nice. And basically wrapped those around the head of the wooden branches, and they burned beautifully. Really nice. Ooh, wine red and gold colors. Let me see. For this project, I carved 5 blocks. Wow. Pelican, blood drops, a Byzantine flower, cross of Calatrava, and a butterfly. Butterfly is on her heraldry. Butterflies in traditional Korean symbology are auspicious symbols. They are symbols of good luck, and that's why you find that motif in a lot of Korean embroidery and Korean carving and other Korean artwork. They are auspicious, as they should be. They're beautiful. Marguerite says, the guttural German R is to my benefit. I've never mastered the frontal rolled R. Yeah, if you go to Bavaria, over the place, it's so cute. All Bavarian friends or Austrian friends are probably now growling at me. But I think it's very quaint, actually. Yeah, it definitely lightens the rest of the language. Yeah, it was really fun to do that dance with the torches. I would like to actually, now that I've said it aloud and reminded myself of that, I think I would like to do it again in an upcoming event. So if you'd like me to bring late 15th or early 16th century torch dancing to your event, let me know in the comments. Oh my goodness, these stitches. These stitches. Why are they so good? Wow. Yep. I still have lots of this thread too. This is really good silk thread. Other thread may yield with time, not this. Question, is it also a symbol of change like in Japan? That's a good question. I have not heard of it referred to that way, although that would obviously, is the butterfly a symbol of change as it is in Japan? That would make sense because obviously, you've got the pupal stages, larva, cocoon, butterfly, etc. But I actually have not seen it in association per se with change. It just, I don't know if it can also have that meaning for Korean poetry, though, because I have to ashamedly admit I have not yet delved into ancient Korean poetry to really explore the symbolism as it appears there. I can say that in art, it's generally just placed there because it's auspicious. But perhaps in poetry and literature, it might have the double meaning of symbolizing change. Let me see. I'm using my garb knowledge to work on a figure for a scroll that you're laying out. Oh, wow, Marguerite, it's funny how a lot of modern people don't realize or they forget that a lot of the really stunning miniatures, illuminated miniatures of the 15th and 16th century were actually done by famous artists who worked in canvas or on wooden panels normally, but who are also often commissioned to produce really, amazing works for illuminated works. So they had a lot of knowledge about how garments flowed and how to represent them in art. So it makes sense that using your knowledge of medieval clothing would to actually help you create that in an illumination miniature. Yeah, that makes total sense. For those who don't know and are not familiar with, Cennino Cennini's 15th century handbook of artisanal crafts how to mix your pigments, how to mix paint, how to work in tempera, how to work in oil. He talks about how to actually layer your paint down to create different effects. If you want to create a good skin tone, then you start with green and then layer up from there, for instance. He also talks about how to paint fabrics, how to paint cloth of gold, how to paint velvet, how to paint satin, how to layer your paints on so that you can create the appropriate effect. It's a very interesting manual for anyone who is interested in any kind of handcraft, really, because he also talks about how to make glues, how to make fish glue, how to make hide glue, how to make rabbit glue. He discusses how to prepare your canvas from scratch, from gesso on up. He talks about how to prepare your panels. Let's see, he talks about how to transfer patterns onto fabric for embroidery, because also artists were hired to draw the cartoons for tapestries and for intricate embroidered works, which a lot of people also don't know. Here it is. The Craftsman's Handbook is the current translation. Yeah. I can put it here too. The Craftsman's Handbook, Il Libro dell'Arte by Cennino Cennini. Yeah, it's an excellent work. Can recommend. Very interesting read if you're at all interested in any kind of medieval arts and crafts, really, because he covers so many different subjects that you never know what you might find. He talks about gilding, how to gild things. He talks about fresco, how to work in fresco, how to do a fresco. Yeah, he talks about preparing your pigments, lead point drawing. I mean, it's a real must-have, especially in my opinion, for calligraphers and illuminators who are interested in really getting into the more historical side of their art. Very good read. Let me see. One of the things I love about traditional Japanese clothing is how the colors and themes vary by seasons or even the month. Yeah, the Japanese have, elevated so much to a fine art. It's they do that with music, they do that with poetry. That same idea was applied to many of their arts. It's even to tea and the service of tea and what kind of tea you should take which times of year. For instance, Korea is much less ritualistic than that. I think Korea's always been more practical on that aspect. So, people always ask me, well, are there, traditional colors that you should wear at different times of year in Joseon or in Goryeo or in Sheila? And the reality is that we don't necessarily know going back for Sheila or Goryeo. And in Joseon, I haven't really found any evidence of that. There were colors that were used for specific ceremonies, and that's a different matter, not necessarily the time of year. Yeah. Illuminated manuscripts are gorgeous. Oh, their stuff is amazing. Absolutely amazing. Okay, well, I now have the neckband removed. There we go. So we're now ready to proceed to the next stage. And I'm just looking to see how much reinforcement I might actually need to do here on the sleeves. If there's any other spots of wear and tear, there's another spot there. So yeah, I have to decide whether I'm going to put another band in, and I think I will put another band in because that will also add some thickness here, and that will make it easier to fill the space with the cartridge pleats. So another trick for getting cartridge pleats to fill this space you need it to is to just add an extra band on to thicken the edge, and then that makes your cartridge pleats naturally thicker, and then that will fill out the length that you need to fill out if your fabric is a little too thin. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to add a band, a facing on the inside of the shoulder area, the sleeve area, and then, yeah, I'm going to be repleating it so that the back comes up higher than the front. So that probably means there'll be a few more pleats in the back than there are in the front, or deeper pleats. Because otherwise it's perfectly symmetrical. You can kind of see here, there's no difference in the height of the front, in the length of the front panel, or the length of the back panel. They are the same. So I think they're the same. Since I made this, I don't remember what I did, if I made the front panel longer than the back panel. Let me check that quickly. I can check this. Line up the hem. Okay, no, the back panel is longer, but it needs to be longer. So I'll remember that in the next kamicha I make, that I need to make the back panel even longer so that it comes up higher in the back. So I think I'm just going to end up putting in maybe slightly deeper pleats in the back half of the sleeve so that it draws up the back. Because as I said, I don't need the front to be drawn up. I just need the back to be drawn up. Okay, well, I've been holding forth for an hour and 35 minutes, and my derriere is starting to get a little numb. So are there any questions or final comments? I'll give everyone a chance to ask any of their final questions, share any final anecdotes and any stories, while I just kind of pick out some of the threads that are now hanging loose. Oh, and I can see, actually, I have to still detach a piece here. Where did my evil snips go? Just some stitches clinging with dear sweet life to these cartridge pleats. Goodness. Thanks, and how are the kitties? The kitties, well, I guess we're about to have a kitty. Bring her here. Come on. Haha. Here is Nobby, for those who don't know my kitties. This is our latest rescue kitten. We rescued her from a mother who abandoned her, and she was going to die. And she was probably about 4 weeks old. And now she's about 5 months old, we think, 5.5 months old, maybe. She's an ornery little cutie, isn't she? So yeah, she's happy. This is Chimi. He's another of our rescues. His mother was killed in a car accident, we think, and so he and his siblings were left abandoned. Yeah, Chimi's a real sweetie too. And then this is Tommy. Tommy has folded ears, naturally. Also, that's his brother. Tommy and Chimi are brothers. And Tommy, unfortunately, their mother was killed when they were still nursing, so they both have suckle reflexes still. So Tommy has a suckle blanket that he needs pretty regularly to feel like he's actually full. Yeah, they're all sweeties though, and they all get along. And even though at first they rejected little Nobby, which means flower, blossom. Butterfly, right? Sorry, Nobby means butterfly. Speaking of butterflies, even though she was rejected at first, they're now one big happy family. Yep. So, yeah, those are our kitties. For those of you who've ever watched any of my long format videos, if you watch to the end, there's always kitty content. Or those evil snips. Still trying to get rid of this. Wow. This thread is really persistent. Final scraps. Okay. Well, I will call that. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for joining me. If you're watching this as a recording, if you have questions and you put them in the comments, I will absolutely answer them. Next week, check the schedule of my content, because next week, I think on the 18th, I'm doing a post-mortem about my pink Florentine Gamora, the pink Florentine base layer gown, what I did well, what I need to change, and what I will do differently next time, and also show you where the wear and tear is already starting to show up now that I've worn it a little bit. Okay, everyone, thank you so much. Have a lovely weekend wherever you are in the world, and try to stay positive, everyone. Bye.